Morning. So it's an interesting question, and thanks, Justin, for the question. So he asked, when World War III comes, will that further divide or will it unite the U.S.? And it reminded me of, there's a computer game I play called Hearts of Iron 4, and it's kind of a World War II strategic simulator sort of game. And you take the role of one of the combatants in World War II and manage the economy and move troops around different locations of the globe, and you refight the battles. And it can be you can play it in historical mode, and the other countries kind of do what they would have done, or you can play it on ahistorical mode and make different decisions and see how things might have played out. And there's a huge modding community for Hearts of Iron 4, and one of the mods, and I'm not sure if it's based on a novel or if this was just a mod that somebody created, but either way, I think I actually saw an alternate history channel on YouTube do a video on one of these mods called Kaiserreich. And Kaiserreich is the alternate history of World War II if Germany and Kaiser Wilhelm had won World War I, right? Which is kind of an interesting jumping off point, historically. And so there's all sorts of things that change in the interwar years following World War I in the Kaiserreich timeline, where Germany and the Central Powers won the war. And so the defeated are France, the UK, Russia, and then the US never even enters the war. They remain neutral. And so when you get to World War II in the Kaiserreich timeline, the US is a very different place, and you didn't have the unifying effects of World War I and how that changed US foreign policy, Woodrow Wilson and all that. And so the Depression has a very different effect on the US, and you end up getting this balkanization in the US where you've got kind of the mainline United States that's actually turns into kind of like an autocratic sort of right-wing authoritarian government, maybe, that's run by Douglas MacArthur. You have this kind of like centrist populist wing that fractures off in the south under Huey Long. I forget the name of the leader of the kind of quasi-communist revolutionary Rust Belt Midwest, and then like the Republic of California and the West Coast kind of splits off into its own thing too. And so you get this like kind of wild melee within the United States that breaks out, and you get kind of this reversal of like the European theater in World War II, and instead you've got these different factions trying to prop up a winner in the second U.S. Civil War with all these competing factions, right? And so you've got the kind of like communist syndicalists in maybe the France and UK supporting the Rust Belt states, and maybe MacArthur being propped up by the German Empire, and it's just kind of an interesting way to think about maybe what might happen. How plausible the Kaiserreich timeline is, I don't know. I'll try and remember to drop a link to the Alternate History Hub video on Kaiserreich, and you can get kind of more of a detailed breakdown of it. But I think that's interesting in terms of World War III and this question of, whether or not a third world war would further unite or divide us. And I mean, my crystal ball is broken. I don't know. And I'll let you know what it is from my, giant mansion once I get it up and running. It could kind of go both ways. And I mean, we are kind of at maybe similar-ish pre World War II Kaiserreich timeline moment where we could have this sudden and rapid balkanization of the U.S. and maybe have different, European Asian factions try and influence the combatants in a second American Civil War, and you might have, the EU trying to prop up a faction around the Mid-Atlantic, or China trying to prop up a Western states faction, or maybe even Russia further trying to involve itself in U.S. politics, or knows, right? So I mean, there's certainly, I think, the potential there for a war to kind of deepen the divisive politics within the United States, because I think there is a certain segment of the population that, is maybe, pro-China or more pro-EU. And so, it kind of depends on where World War III goes. But, if we're talking about this moment now, and the potential triggers for a third world war, the two big ones are Ukraine right now, right? And whether or not the conflict expands beyond Russia and Ukraine into a NATO country. And I have no doubt that NATO and U.S. by extension would pull together in that sort of scenario, and go out and fight the Russians. And under those circumstances, Russia doesn't have a chance in a conventional war. And then the second trigger for World War III, as things stand right now, is Taiwan. And it's much more unclear as to whether the U.S. will take action to defend Taiwan. It's certainly in the U.S.'s interest, and the U.S. has been building a kind of a coalition to deter China from making a move for Taiwan. And it in the maybe more aggressive posture, the U.S. might be able to pull Japan, Australia, India, Vietnam, the Philippines, other regional nations, maybe Indonesia, into a coalition to oppose the Chinese. However, given how things are right now, I don't have a whole lot of confidence that'll happen, especially in light of how things went with Hong Kong. I don't see our leadership, really kind of pressing the big red button, so to speak, over Taiwan, despite the fact that it really is kind of the linchpin of our foreign policy in the Pacific, as far as my understanding takes me. Acknowledging that I am neither a military tactician or expert in geopolitical matters. This is just kind of my opinion, for whatever that's worth, which is honestly not much, but it's interesting to think about, and especially on the Taiwan issue. Given that I don't think it's entirely likely that the U.S. would intervene to protect Taiwan, and that if we get into a shooting war with either the Russians or the Chinese, we're looking at a not unlikely kind of doomsday event where it goes nuclear, and really we're just fighting World War IV with sticks and stones. Or so the saying goes. Right after, if the Third World War would be nuclear, and the Fourth World War would be fought with, rocks and clubs or something like that. So I think the more interesting question is, assuming China at some point in the next decade or two makes a move for Taiwan, and assuming the U.S. doesn't have the will or the wherewithal to resist that and prop up Taiwan. What does that do as far as the ascending maybe China and the declining U.S. and the balance of power globally. I don't know. And I mean, that again, it kind of harkens back to the Kaiserreich timeline. In either case, in our real world timeline, the defeated power becomes fractious or aggressive or more extreme in some light as a reaction to a setback, and then the victorious power becomes fat and complacent and weaker over time. And would that put the U.S. in a situation where the kind of external setback of losing power and influence internationally deepens the divide in the U.S. as competing ideologies cannot converge on a solution to move the country forward, and those fault lines start opening up. I mean, I think there's a lot of potential there for something like that to happen. So, I mean, it really, whether a global conflict tends to unite or divide us, I think it really depends on how things hash out now. But I mean, ultimately, if we're talking about WW3, that is some kind of global cataclysmic war. I mean, historically speaking, major conflicts are always fought with the latest and greatest in weapons, and we've gotten to the point where we can really, damage at least civilization beyond any kind of immediate repair, or maybe even, wipe out intelligent life on the planet if we're really dead set on it. So at that point, I don't think it really matters whether World War III is going to unite or divide us. It's going to split our atoms, quite literally. At least that's my perspective on it, but I'd love to hear your perspective on it. So feel free to drop a comment below. Let me know what else you want to hear my ridiculous opinions on. If you're enjoying so far, thank you, and consider subscribing. And it's been fun, inspiring, and uplifting as always. We'll see you on the next one.